honor to introduce our speaker for the evening, Kate Ruehle. Kate is a mother, a wife, a child suicide loss survivor, activist, advocate, and mixed media artist. She's a member of the Suicide Prevention Collaborative and the local outreach to suicide loss survivors. Kate's story is one of loss and love, a grief journey that led to healing through advocacy. And Kate's hope is that her story will spare others the pain her family has endured. And without further ado, here is Kate.
Shattered dream. My longed for but often chaotic and challenging family life was a dream come true until one day the dream was broken by a nightmare. On the morning of February 8th, I went to wake up my son for school and found him dead. Warren, my beautiful boy, died by his own hand, ending the pain he carried silently until the end. Warren was a beautiful baby. He had a perfectly smooth little head and cornstalk hair, bright blue eyes. He looked like a perfect little angel, but he was fussy and it was hard to get him to settle. His dad had to wrap him up like a burrito, and only dad could get it tight enough because he would wriggle and get free and get fussy. Warren was a high intensity, high sensitivity child. I remember him looking in his nursery up at the shelf, and he was staring at his stuffed animals. He looked scared. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I realized it was his owl with the big eyes and his Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy with their button eyes, and they were staring down at him. And so I had to turn them around. And that's how sensitive he was. But he was a happy, goofy child. He loved running. He loved jumping, and he was an expert at the running flip. He would run into the pool and flip off the side of the pool, off the dock in Tahoe into Lake Tahoe. In our backyard, we had a slip and slide. He would run on the slip and slide and do a running flip. And he always landed on his feet. I can see him jumping on the couch, giggling mischievously, and just having the best time. And even though I knew he should be doing it and I should make him stop, he just was so cute. He was so adorable. I couldn't help but to just laugh with him and just let him get away with it. We found out when Warren was about 2 that he had a photographic memory. And the way we found out was because he had these alphabet blocks, and he loved those alphabet blocks. He would bring them everywhere with him, and he had them in the tub, and he would ask for, this is how we found out that he had memorized all of the letters and the colors of the squares, because when I was giving him a bath, he would say, letter A, and I look and I'd find the letter A on the ground. And then he'd say blue square. And the blue square went with the red A. And he went down the whole alphabet, every single color, every single block. He had every color memorized. It was just beyond belief. He also memorized his books. And so I thought he could read. He just remembered all the words. But he just loved learning, and we would, when we had our 5-minute time at night, and it always turned into a lot more, we would look at his I Spy book, and he would find things. And I always remember him pointing to this vegetable and saying kohlrabi perfectly. he just he was really he was so smart, such a smart kid. He loved his pets. We've always had a lot of pets. We had 2 cats and a dog, and he just he would always play with them, and he was just so gentle and sweet with them. His personality was witty. He was whip smart, and his humor was a bit sarcastic. He was also a natural athlete, and he started playing soccer when he was 4 and got into playing tennis when he was a little older, and was on the top tier singles team. He was on the tennis team at Nevada High and played as a single player. He was always playing frisbee at lunch and basketball after school, and he loved hanging out with his friends and gaming with his friends. And he was a really kind friend. Most of his friends were gamers, and he would play tournaments, and then they won a lot and would go out for boba and Korean barbecue. So he had a lot of fun, and he had a lot of friends, and his friends were a very diverse group. They were Black, Asian, Latino, didn't matter what color you were, as long as you were a gamer. And he had special relationships with his family, special bonds with his sisters. He was a twin, and his twin sister and him were very close, although different personality-wise. They had that special twin bond. And his sister Alyssa and him were close as well, and had a special bond because they were both gamers and had a similar temperament. He was really close with his dad as well. His dad was a Cub Scout leader, and they did a lot of hikes and trips together. And he really looked up to his dad. And then his relationship with me was playful. We just were always kind of playing a little rough sometimes and just teasing each other. And I'd get him to go on walks with me, even towards the end of his life when he was a teenager. He would always walk pretty far ahead and didn't want to be seen with me, but he would go on walks with me. And I taught him to drive, and so some of my favorite times together was in the car when we'd be driving, and he was my captive audience, so he had to listen to what I had to say. And did a lot of family travel. We got to do some really great trips together with Warren. We went to Europe, and we went to Alaska, and we spent summers in Tahoe. That was Warren's favorite place, and also Cabo, where we went every year. So we had a very happy, connected family life. But in high school, things began to change. Warren began to change his freshman year, and one of his friends had commented that he wasn't his goofy self anymore. He noticed he just wasn't joking around and as silly and goofy anymore. He was very serious. He became more and more isolated. He spent less time with his family and friends, but it happened slowly over time. And so we didn't really notice how bad it had become. Warren was suffering in silence. After his death, we were all grieving differently. I didn't know how to support my family, and I later learned in therapy that everyone grieves differently, and I learned how my family was grieving differently, and I learned to understand that young people will reset and they'll go back to where they were before the tragedy, and some people compartmentalize, which is what my husband did to cope, and then I was grieving very openly, and it was really hard for me not being able to support my family, and I really wanted to grieve with them, but I couldn't because we were all grieving differently. So that was really hard. And then the day after Warren's death, I checked us into the ER, and that was really the best thing that I could have done. And I don't know how I had the insight to do that. It was just something that I just instinctively knew to do. And so that really helped us to prevent that PTSD from setting in, and we got the help that we needed for trauma and shock. And we began our trauma therapy that day, the very day after his death, and worked with a trauma specialist. But when we got home, I began my descent into trauma-induced anxiety. We had spent 4 nights away from the house because I could not be in the house. I couldn't be near his room. And I just needed to get out of the house. But when we got home, I just became more and more depressed. I developed chronic insomnia. I became dependent on sleep medication. I was drinking during the day to numb the pain. And at night, I was taking sleep medications to escape into a merciful sleep. It felt like the grief was just this gnawing pain, just eating me up from inside, just threatening to consume me. In the morning, I lay in bed, sobbing uncontrollably until I could barely breathe. My face and eyes were swollen beyond recognition, and I was losing myself. But I started finding my way back because I knew my family needed me. So I began to take action. I started going to the Compassionate Friends. And that was the first support group I went to. I went to Hospice of Marin. I received EMDR, which is electric shock therapy, and that really helped with the PTSD, and that enabled me to be able to go back home. Well, I was already back home, but to stay at home, to be able to stay at home. And I'm still finding my way. I know that I will always be on this path. I don't believe that I'll ever recover because I have a broken heart. But I also know that I can live a fulfilling and happy life. But sometimes grief does take me to my knees. And a memory or a photo can just pierce right through my heart. And I remember how he died and that he's gone. But what really helped me heal was when I began writing. I was writing my eulogy for a Warren celebration of life, and somehow I was able to pull it together for that, and the community and family and friends helped with that celebration of life, and that gave me reason to get out of bed in the morning, because getting out of bed was really hard. And so I began to heal. It felt like the pain was pouring from my broken heart and came into life onto paper. I wrote of my deep love for him, and I promised to make a difference in the world in his name, and that his death wouldn't be in vain. And through writing, it felt as if a heavy weight had begun to lift, and my grief began to lighten. The light began to find its way in. I wrote a love letter to Warren, which I was going to read, but I don't think we have enough time. Community support played a big part in our healing as well. The night after Warren died, the community came together to hold a vigil at St. Anthony's Church, and friends and family enfolded us in what felt like collective arms of comforting care. They carried us through the darkest of days with their kindness, generosity, and compassion. We felt a deep empathy from all we knew, and even those we didn't. Never forget arriving at the church and seeing all those cars in the parking lot. And I said to my friend, there must be another event going on tonight. She said, no, this is all for you, all for your family, all for Warren. And the most profound thing happened when we walked into that church. The doors opened and we looked inside and we saw all those people waiting for us, sitting, and they all stood up and they turned and faced us. It was such a powerful, powerful moment, such a feeling of love filled that church and was just overflowing and into our hearts, and just really helped us heal. I'll never forget that outpouring of empathy, love, and support, and it will always be remembered with the deepest of gratitude. The community, just the support was amazing. We received meals for months, and flowers, beautiful white lilies and roses, and our house was just filled with the aroma of the flowers and so many lovely gifts and plants. And it was just amazing, just all the generous, beautiful gifts that we received. One of the things that I remember my daughter Alyssa doing that just really touched me and really helped with my healing was she took the white flowers, all the roses, and she put them in the room where Warren died. I couldn't go in that room. And also Kara, his twin sister, she couldn't go in that room either. We just had a hard time going in there because she had also found him. But what Alyssa did was so beautiful. She took all those roses and she put them in that room. And then she put a string of the little fairy lights throughout the roses. And so my husband, Glenn, came to me and he said, there's a lightness now in that room. It's really beautiful. You should go in and you should see it. And so I did. And it was so beautiful. And I don't know how she knew that would be so healing. But it really was. It's just a really special thing that she did. And I'm just so proud of my girls and how well they've done in life and how strong they are. And Kara went off after her brother died, graduated from high school, and then went on to college and is now graduating. And Alyssa also has graduated from college, and they're doing so amazingly well. So the community support, as I said, was really a huge part of our healing, and they just really carried us through the darkest of days. They checked in, friends would check in. I had offers from people I hardly knew to go work out at the gym or go on walks and things like that. So to stay on the right path, I practice self-care. I'm learning new rituals. I'm not the best at self-care, so I really need to work on that. But I try to balance my advocacy work, which can be really exhausting mentally and emotionally, with time spent with family and friends. What I enjoy the most is traveling, engaging in cultural activities and spending time in nature. I find writing and mixed media art to be very healing. But I find it challenging to find time to do those things that I love to do. And I know that when you're depressed, you tend to not do the things you love to do. And that was one of the things that we noticed about Warren as well. So I try to make time to do those things. And I know that if I don't recharge and do those things, that I will have an empty well. Can't give from an empty well. So I need to fill up my well. So what I've learned is really important to share what we learned about Warren and what happened with him. So Warren had insomnia. He was severely sleep deprived. He became irritable because he was so tired. So we attributed a lot of his behavior to being a typical teenager. And I just want to point out that that's a really dangerous assumption. And I don't even like that term, typical teenager. I think it just needs to be done away with, because you can miss those warning signs. And the irritability can be a warning sign. Warren was suffering in silence. He never shared his thoughts or feelings. He isolated. He was also an extremely introverted person. So, we just thought he was being introverted, but he was isolating more and more over time. And it just was so gradual that we didn't really notice how bad it had gotten. But he also was addicted to video games. So he had a hard time with social. He didn't learn social emotional skills. They are developed when you're spending time talking and communicating, which he didn't do a lot of because he was playing video games. And his friends were gamers, and they weren't big talkers or communicators. They didn't share about their feelings, thoughts and feelings, but they had a good time playing sports and things like that together. And so his friends also noticed that he wasn't doing those things that he loved. As I mentioned before, he used to play basketball after school. He used to play Frisbee at lunch, and he just stopped doing those things. And so they told me about that after he died, because I asked them if they had noticed any signs about that, his behavior as well. So they learned also from what happened with Warren to be on the lookout for those signs with their other friends, and even with just people they know. They know that that's a sign. Now we've all learned so much from what happened with Warren, even his friends, even the librarian who said that he was on her radar, and if she had known which she knows now, because she's learned about suicide prevention and she knows the signs, she would have reached out to him. So just the way that he was isolating was a sign. So he would spend time in the library, and that's why he was on her radar, because she would see him in there and he was studying. And that was the other thing, he was always studying. He was really trying his best. He was getting the best grades of his life. So, that was another thing. Like even though he was sleep deprived, he would still get up and go to school every day. He didn't stay in bed. He just kept going. And we realized now that he was trying to fix himself. He never asked for help because he thought he could fix himself. If he just got the best grades, if he just was the best at tennis, or just, applied himself, he would get through it. Everything would be okay. I know he had a crush on a girl, and he didn't know how to talk to her. So he really wanted a girlfriend. And that was something that was frustrating for him, that he didn't know how to talk to girls. He just didn't have that social, emotional, he didn't learn it. He didn't know how to communicate with especially the opposite sex, which is hard for anyone, but especially an introverted person. And so I know it's really hard to parent a teenager, and it's really hard to read them. So the signs of suicidal behavior can be really confusing. And with us the sign with Warren, the big one with him that was so confusing, was that he was happier. Like 2 weeks before he died, we think he had made up his mind, because all of a sudden he was more thankful. He made eye contact. He seemed better. His mood was lighter. It was a change in behavior. Any change in behavior could be a sign of suicidal ideation. And he had a change in behavior, but it was a good change. So that's why it was so confusing, because we thought he's doing better, getting ready to go to college, getting the best grades of his life, learning how to cook, learned how to drive. So that's one of the things that's so confusing about people like Warren, is how they are outwardly doing really well. But the moodiness and the isolation and the sleep deprivation, insomnia, that's also another one. But you hear so often about these people who are just so successful, that star athletes, the executives, these people who are just doing incredible work in the world, and they're the life of the party. You hear all these things about them, and then they end up dying by suicide, and it's so confusing. So we're missing the signs. And that's why I do what I do, because Warren suffered in silence, and the signs that he exhibited were not typical signs. So it makes me sad that so few people got to know Warren, because he was so introverted and he died so young. And that's another reason why I want to talk about him every chance I get, because I can keep him alive in my stories, and maybe even help keep someone else alive. His life mattered. He was an incredible person. I just wish he knew how loved and how special he was to his family and friends. In closing, just like to say a few things about what I've learned. I've learned that it's really important to talk about suicide, because talking about suicide isn't going to make someone die by suicide. If anything, it's going to help them to feel comfortable talking and opening up. If it's normalized to talk about it, to talk about your mental health challenges openly, even with your children. If you're having a bad day, admit it. Don't try to pretend that everything is, always good, because life is hard. And, we all have anxiety. We all have depression. We all have, maybe not all of us, but we have our moments, and there's situational depression that we can feel. There's also clinical depression, and the anxiety is through the roof these days for so many people. So it's really important to normalize talking about mental health, and community support is so important. And, to wrap around those people who, are suffering, who are struggling, either, with a loved one who may be struggling with substance abuse, or who is suicidal, or they may be struggling. Or if you're struggling, feel safe in opening up and asking for help. And there's people who care about you, and your life matters. And you are loved. And even if you don't believe it, it's true. And so always know that, and form a circle of friends that are going to be there for you, that love you and support you no matter what. And be there for them. And if you have that connection with your family, where you can communicate and talk things through, it's so important. Make sure to keep that connection with your kids, especially, and make eye contact. Making eye contact is so important. I can't stress that enough. Warren never made eye contact. Like towards the end, he just, and that was another warning sign, I think, that I would add to the list, is when your loved one isn't making eye contact with you, when you feel you've lost your connection. It's really important to double down on those efforts to reconnect and don't give up. I let Warren isolate. I let him be in his room more than he should have, and tried to get him out, and try to get him to engage, but he just wasn't willing. Just like sometimes people are not willing to get therapy. Keep trying, don't give up, don't give in, break through, make that connection. I think that would be my advice, is to even have an intervention if you have someone who is isolating like that, and get backup from your family. So anyway, I just want to, so in closing, I've learned that I offer deep empathy for others suffering, and that my lived experience is of great value. By offering insight into how to overcome and prevail after the traumatic loss of a loved one, I can inspire others to believe they can too. I show by example life is still worth living and can be fulfilling and joyful at times. It's okay to enjoy your life. It doesn't mean you don't still feel the pain of losing your loved one. It just means your love is strong enough to carry you through it. Thank you.